At her husband's office party, he looked at her dead in the eye and laughed in front of everyone. "Leona's little business?" He sneered. "She's more of a housewife. She doesn't understand real success." Everyone chuckled. Everyone except the CEO, Victor. Because what Thomas didn't know. Is that his ordinary wife, the woman he belittled, mocked, and underestimated, was the silent billionaire investor who saved his entire company from collapse. Tonight, he was about to learn exactly who he married and what real success looks like. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Like, share, and subscribe, and let's dive into the story. The mornings in their apartment always began the same. Leona woke first, not because she had to, but because her mind never truly rested anymore. She slid out of the sheets quietly, careful not to wake Thomas. He always claimed he needed more rest. "Real work is exhausting," he'd mutter, as if her work existed only in imagination. The kettle hummed softly, while the city outside stretched awake. A chorus of traffic mixed with the far hum of trains. Leona's laptop waited on the kitchen counter, exactly where she left it. Her notebook stacked neatly beside it, color-coded tabs, handwritten strategy timelines, articles about startup valuation laws, international fund compliance notes, quiet brilliance disguised as a hobby. She brewed her tea, sat down, and opened her screen. A message blinked. "Draft investment agreement attached. Review before our call next week. A. Donahue." She read it slowly, eyes calm and focused. Investors, real ones. Not imaginary. Her world wasn't loud, but it was expanding, like roots spreading far beneath soil before anything ever blooms above ground. Behind her, there was movement. Sheets rustling, a faint sigh. Then the familiar shuffle of a man walking without urgency. Thomas entered the kitchen with the posture of someone who believed the world always owed him a good day simply because he had chosen to wake up. "Morning," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Morning," she replied gently. His gaze drifted to her laptop. Predictable. His sigh was almost rehearsed. "Please tell me you're not doing that again already." "That?" she asked, turning slightly. "You know." He gestured lazily toward her work. "Whatever. Business journaling thing you're doing." "It's not journaling, Thomas." He opened the fridge. "Sure feels like journaling from where I stand." She looked at him for a moment, the man she once believed would be proud of her forever. She remembered their college library nights, the way he pressed sticky notes on her laptop with encouragement like, "Future CEO in progress." He used to call her unstoppable. Now he called her unnecessary. She closed her laptop softly. Not out of shame. She just knew arguing before breakfast would lead nowhere but exhaustion. "I have an investor follow-up call later," she said peacefully. "With who?" His tone wasn't curiosity. It was doubt wearing clothes pretending to be curiosity. "Another advisor? Or one of those internet inspiration coaches?" She could have said the truth. That the man emailing her manages funds most executives dream of shaking hands with. But she'd learned something about Thomas. When a person fears being outgrown, truth doesn't enlighten them. It threatens them. She chose silence instead. He smirked at her quiet. Silence to him was weakness, not strategy. "You know," he continued, pouring his coffee, "I've been thinking. It's been almost a year since you started this idea thing. Maybe it's time to be realistic. Slow down, just enjoy life. There's no need to chase something that isn't happening." She listened without reaction, her spine straight, her face unreadable. She wasn't breakable, just tired of being expected to hide her shine so his shadow didn't feel insecure. "I enjoy building things," she said calmly. "Even if they take time." He chuckled, not cruelly, but casually. Which somehow hurt more. Leona building what? A website? A vision board? "Come on," she exhaled, a slow, measured breath. "One day, Thomas, you'll see it." "I promise." He leaned down to kiss her cheek before leaving the kitchen. Not because he felt affection, but because it maintained the image he liked to believe they had. "I already see it," he muttered with a light laugh on his way out. Just isn't much there. The door closed behind him a moment later. His expensive cologne lingered, but his presence, that heavy sense of judgment, superiority, and expectation, finally faded. Silence returned. Peaceful, dignified silence. She lifted her tea. Let warmth fill her chest, she whispered to herself, not out of delusion, but out of conviction. I'm building more than he can dream of. Her laptop opened again. The screen came alive with spreadsheets, contracts, venture discussions across time zones. It looked like nothing to Thomas, but it was everything. And she was everything, just not to the man who slept beside her. Later that afternoon, she grocery shopped, not because she had to, but because she liked choosing her own fresh ingredients. She believed in nurturing life in every form: plants, food, business ideas, relationships. Care mattered. While picking avocados, she remembered the first time she cooked for him in college. He said, "You're going to run a company and feed the world." She smiled at the memory, then felt something hollow behind her ribs. People don't always change. Sometimes they reveal what they always were once they think they're winning. Back home, she organized the kitchen, folded laundry, answered emails, reviewed legal notes, and meditated for 10 quiet minutes. Happiness wasn't loud, neither was discipline. At 6:04 p.m., the door opened again. Thomas, flushed with office adrenaline, walked in carrying a paper bag. "Big news," he announced, loosening his tie dramatically. "There's a corporate party this Saturday. Partners, senior executives, even Victor, the CEO, will be there. Huge networking opportunity," she smiled softly. "That's exciting." "Yep, and you're coming," he pointed casually. "Try to wear something. Classy, but not, flashy. The simple, elegant thing. Don't talk too much about your business plans or whatever. Just be supportive. Everyone brings their wives. It's kind of like a formality." She blinked once, twice. So that was her role now. Atmosphere, accessory, silent background proof of domestic stability. "Of course," she said simply. "I'll be there." He nodded like he'd given her a privilege. "Good. Just remember, this event matters." "I know," she replied quietly. "More than you think." He didn't catch it. He never did. She walked into the bedroom later, closed the door gently, and leaned on it for just a moment. Not to cry. She was past tears. This was clarity. The kind that forms only when someone keeps underestimating you long enough for you to realize it's not your worth that's invisible. It's their vision that's small. On the nightstand lay her old college notebook, the one filled with dreams, sketches, company ideas, scribbled in midnight frustration. She ran a finger over the first page. "One day, I'll build something that changes futures." She wasn't meant to be a trophy wife or someone's polite +1. She wasn't built to decorate a room. She was built to reshape it. The city lights blinked through their bedroom window as she whispered to herself again, steady as breath, soon. And somewhere in the tower where Thomas worked, a man named Victor, a man with far more power and vision than her husband ever would have, reviewed a confidential file with her name on it and smiled, already knowing the truth Thomas would discover too late. Leona wasn't small. Her success wasn't invisible. It was simply not his to validate, and the world, his world, would soon bow to the woman he failed to see. The night of the party arrived with the kind of anticipation that makes the city hum louder than usual. Streets glimmered under the golden glow of streetlights, cars humming past like ribbons of sound. Leona stood by the window in their apartment, adjusting the emerald green dress she had chosen. Simple, elegant, commanding without shouting. The satin clung to her in all the right places, but it wasn't for show. It was for presence, power, subtle gravity. Thomas came out of the bedroom in navy blue, freshly pressed suit, tie perfectly knotted. He caught sight of her and smiled, more reflex than admiration. "You look nice," he said casually, though the weight behind those words was thin. Polite, measured, detached. Leona nodded. "Thank you." She didn't soften her tone to make him feel better. That ship had sailed long ago. The ride to the hotel was quiet. Thomas tapped on the steering wheel, occasionally checking his reflection in the rearview mirror, muttering about networking and partnerships. Leona sat still in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, mind running through emails, investment proposals, and partnership updates. To Thomas, she seemed absorbed, distracted, perfectly ordinary. He didn't know she was running circles around every executive he planned to impress tonight. The ballroom shimmered the moment they stepped inside. Crystal chandeliers reflected soft, golden light, bouncing off polished marble floors. Laughter and music wove through the air, the undercurrent of champagne glasses clinking and heels clicking against tile. Thomas' colleagues immediately flocked to him, hands clasping, slaps on the back, small jokes about last quarter's numbers. He leaned into the attention like a man soaking in his own importance. Leona followed quietly behind, her presence understated but undeniable. People noticed her, subtle gasps of admiration here and there, but no one dared approach. She didn't need to talk. She carried authority in her stillness. Thomas didn't see it, or maybe he did, and the realization made him uncomfortable. A colleague leaned toward Thomas and whispered, nodding toward her. "Who's she again?" "I barely recognize her out of context." Thomas waved dismissively. "Leona, she runs a small business from home. Nothing serious, really." He chuckled, the kind of chuckle that pretends to be light, but lands like a hammer. "Keeps the house running too, so I guess she's got her hands full." The room laughed politely. Not cruelly, but just enough to sting. Leona didn't flinch. Her spine remained perfectly straight, eyes calm, unshakable. She could see it, the ignorance in his casual tone, the oblivion to everything she had built silently. She could feel the heat of suppressed pride in her chest, a quiet flame that refused to be extinguished by his words. Victor appeared then, stepping into the ballroom like he owned every corner without needing to declare it. Not in arrogance, but in certainty. His gaze scanned the room, landing on Leona, and for the first time that night, she felt truly seen. Not as a wife standing behind a man, but as the architect of industries he didn't yet understand. He approached quietly, as if reading her aura first. "Leona," he said, voice even but warm. "You're here. That's good. Thank you," she replied softly, but with the kind of tone that could stop a room. Victor's eyes flicked briefly toward Thomas, then back at her, the corner of his mouth lifting ever so slightly. He knew what Thomas didn't, that the woman he had mocked, overlooked, and underestimated was the very reason some of the biggest decisions in this room would succeed or fail. A server passed with champagne, and Thomas grabbed a glass, raising it slightly to his colleagues, as if the night was his stage. He leaned into Leona, voice low but patronizing. "Just remember, tonight's about looking supportive. Don't steal attention, okay?" She took a slow sip from her own glass. "Of course," she said, perfectly neutral. Her tone held no malice, only quiet strength. He smirked. "Good girl." The words hit differently tonight. She let them slide. No reaction. Because tonight she wasn't fighting him. She was preparing for the moment when the world, and every single person in this room, including Thomas, would see her the way she always knew she deserved to be seen. As the speeches began and executives took their places at the podium, she remained poised, observing. Every movement, every gesture, every laugh around the room was a note in the symphony of corporate politics. Thomas leaned closer to her at one point, whispering advice she didn't need, correcting her posture like she was a mannequin instead of the woman who quietly commanded more influence than anyone here could measure. Victor's voice carried easily over the crowd as he began to speak about the company's key contributors, praising diligence, vision, and collaboration. Thomas listened eagerly, expecting his name, perhaps a nod at his hard work. Leona's attention, however, was elsewhere, tracking faces, reading energy, anticipating the moment when silence would turn to recognition. A small shift in the room caught her attention. The executives exchanged surprised glances, murmuring among themselves. Their eyes flicked to her in confusion, then disbelief. She didn't move, didn't respond. She simply remained herself, calm, collected, patient. Thomas noticed it too late. Something in the air changed. The energy shifted toward her, and he could feel the tide turning but couldn't yet understand why. His colleagues whispered behind their hands. Their CEO's gaze lingered on her longer than necessary, and the quiet, restrained authority she carried filled the room in a way that even he could not ignore. He swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the distance between perception and reality. between the image he thought he knew and the woman who had always been there. Quietly, building, growing, invisible only to him. The night was just beginning. And for Thomas, the lesson he never asked to learn was about to arrive in full force. The ballroom was alive with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Everyone was dressed to impress, the air thick with perfume, cologne, and ambition. Thomas moved from table to table, basking in compliments about last quarter's numbers, nodding politely, cracking small jokes. He was the center of his own little universe, unaware that the real gravity of the room was quietly shifting. Leona followed behind, her emerald dress subtle yet commanding. She smiled politely when introduced, shaking hands with executives and partners. Everyone noticed her poise, the quiet intelligence in her eyes. But Thomas didn't. Not yet. "Leona, you can say hello here," he whispered, tugging her lightly toward a cluster of colleagues. "Just don't ramble about your projects or whatever. Just be supportive." She nodded, taking the cue to stand beside him without interrupting. One of his colleagues leaned in, smirking. "So what exactly does she do? You've never mentioned it much." Thomas laughed casually, the kind of laugh meant to dismiss and deflect. "Oh, she runs a few small businesses from home. Nothing serious, you know. Cute little side projects while she keeps the house in order." The room chuckled politely. A few eyebrows raised, but no one challenged him, yet. To them, Thomas sounded confident, like a man whose wife's efforts were negligible. Leona's smile never faltered, but inside, her chest tightened. She had learned long ago not to react immediately. There was a time for confrontation, and tonight was shaping up to be the perfect moment. Victor, standing nearby, noticed the interaction. He had arrived late, as always, and his eyes immediately found her. He didn't approach yet. He simply observed, letting the moment build. Thomas continued, oblivious to the subtle shift. "She's great at organizing things at home. You know, house matters. Really keeps me in line. But the whole business thing, not much to write home about," someone chuckled awkwardly. Leona's lips pressed into a thin line. The laughter around the room made her patience sharpen. Victor finally stepped forward, clearing his throat. The room quieted, sensing the subtle authority in his tone. "Thomas," he said smoothly, "you're right about one thing. She does manage a lot at home." His gaze lingered on Leona, calm, measured, almost reverent. "But perhaps you've underestimated her contribution." "Elsewhere," Thomas blinked. "Elsewhere?" His voice carried a slight edge, a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Yes," Victor said, stepping closer to the center of the room. "Leona Thomas isn't just your wife. She's one of our most strategic investors, the one whose foresight and financial backing helped secure several of our biggest contracts. The projects you're so proud of tonight, many of them wouldn't even exist without her." The room went silent. Thomas froze. The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, trying to protest, but the words stuck. Victor smiled slightly. "She chose to remain humble, preferring a simple life while managing assets worth millions. She invested not for recognition, not for luxury, but for long-term impact, and for the future of her family." Leona's expression remained calm, almost serene. She didn't need to speak. Her presence spoke volumes. Thomas, however, felt every eye in the room turning toward him, seeing him as a man who had misjudged his own wife. You're serious?" He finally managed, voice shaking. Victor nodded. "Completely. She could live anywhere, in any lifestyle. But she chose to stay grounded, nurturing the people she loves while quietly shaping futures." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Colleagues whispered, astonished, as Thomas's earlier jokes now sounded like embarrassment echoing off the walls. Leona stepped forward slightly, her voice calm, unwavering. "I never needed validation from anyone," she said softly. "Not from family, not from colleagues, and certainly not from someone who thought my worth was limited to a title or a paycheck." Thomas could only stare. His pride, once so inflated, had deflated completely. For the first time, he truly saw her. Not the quiet, supportive wife he thought he knew, but a woman of vision, courage, and influence. A few more people approached, shaking her hand, asking questions about her investments, her companies. The room hummed with admiration for her, and Thomas realized painfully how wrong he had been. Leona turned slightly toward him, not in anger, but with a quiet power that made the air itself shift. "Sometimes," she said, "it takes others recognizing your worth before the people closest to you can truly see it." Thomas swallowed hard. His voice caught in his throat. I didn't know." "You didn't," she said gently, "and now you do." The room erupted into applause, not just for the CEO's acknowledgement, but for her presence, her calm authority, her undeniable impact. Thomas stood frozen, a mixture of awe, regret, and humility washing over him. Leona smiled softly, finally allowing herself a quiet victory. Not revenge, not gloating, just recognition of a life she had quietly built, a future she had carefully nurtured, and the truth that sometimes the strongest power is the one people never see coming. The applause still echoed around the ballroom, a living, breathing thing. But to Thomas it sounded like a hammer striking against the walls of his ego. He could barely process the words Victor had just spoken. The room was alive with admiration. For her, his wife, and every glance, every whispered acknowledgement felt like a personal indictment. Leona stood there, calm, composed, almost radiant, and he felt a hollow ache in his chest. The woman he thought he knew, the cute little side project's wife, the one he had mocked, underestimated, and dismissed, was the very reason some of the biggest decisions in this company had succeeded. The truth hit him like a tidal wave. She was powerful, brilliant, and had been quietly shaping worlds while he thought she was idle. His colleagues whispered, and Thomas could hear the disbelief in their voices. She's the investor? The silent partner? The one behind the contracts we celebrated? He looked at her, and in that moment, he saw everything he had missed. The late nights of planning, the early mornings of calculations, the calls he never knew about, the meetings she had attended in secrecy to protect both their privacy and her autonomy. He realized that the woman he had underestimated was not only his equal, but in some ways far beyond him in foresight and courage. "Leona," he whispered, his voice cracking, a tremor of vulnerability breaking through the man who had always relied on control. I didn't know. I didn't." She turned toward him slowly, her eyes soft but steady. Not anger, not triumph, just clarity. "You didn't see," she said gently, almost a statement of fact. "And that's all right. But now, you do." The weight of it crushed him. His chest tightened. He felt shame, awe, and something deeper. A raw recognition of what he had taken for granted. Every time he belittled her work, every sarcastic remark, every comment about her being just supportive, every doubt he cast on her abilities, all of it flashed before him. And he felt every misstep burn inside him. Tears prickled at the corners of his eyes. He blinked rapidly, trying to hide them, but she noticed. She always noticed. Victor's voice cut gently through the moment, loud enough for him to hear, but not demanding attention. Leona Thomas chose to remain humble while shaping futures for more than herself. That's a kind of strength some never understand. Thomas couldn't speak. Words had abandoned him. His pride, once his armor, had crumbled completely, and all he could do was stare at her, trembling. Leona stepped closer, the room still buzzing, around them, and reached out a hand, not accusatory, not condescending, but inviting. "Thomas," she said softly, "you've always been part of my life. But you need to understand me fully now, not as someone who manages your home or supports your ego, but as the person I am, as I've always been." He choked, swallowing hard. I've been blind. I didn't see how incredible you are. I'm sorry." The tears finally broke. He could no longer hold them back. For the first time in years, he felt utterly vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, he understood something he never had before. Humility wasn't weakness. Respect wasn't optional. Recognition wasn't about praise. It was about seeing clearly, about valuing what had been there all along. Leona's smile softened, her hand resting lightly on his. It's not about apologies, Thomas. It's about realizing what matters. And sometimes, we need to be shown the truth before we can truly understand it. He nodded, tears streaming freely now. I get it. I see you. I see everything you've done. I don't deserve you. She shook her head gently, her eyes glinting with quiet triumph. You never had to deserve me. But now you can choose to walk beside me as someone who understands me, fully. The room around them faded. Not because the applause stopped, it didn't. But because it didn't matter anymore. In that space, all that existed was him seeing her clearly for the first time, and her standing there, unshakable, powerful, and undeniably herself. Thomas fell to his knees, not in shame, but in awe, humbled by the sheer magnitude of the woman before him. He buried his face in his hands, whispering incoherently, trying to process the storm of emotions. Pride, regret, admiration, awe, all collided at once. Leona knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Not to lift him, not to scold, just to remind him he was still part of her world if he chose to be. You have a choice now, Thomas, she said quietly. Will you see me, or will you stay in your old shadow? He lifted his head, eyes red, throat tight. I choose to see you. I promise. Always. And in that moment, surrounded by the glittering lights, the whispers of astonished colleagues, and the hum of celebration, Thomas finally understood what he had spent years blind to. Leona Thomas was not just his wife. She was a force, a vision, a woman who had built empires quietly while he assumed he led the way. And he wept, finally seeing her as she deserved to be seen. The drive home was quiet. The city lights blurred past the windows, but neither of them spoke much. Thomas kept glancing at Leona, seeing her in a way he never had before. She didn't need validation from him. She didn't need to explain herself. She simply was, and he was just beginning to comprehend the magnitude of it. When they entered their apartment, the familiar space suddenly felt different. He noticed things he had ignored for years: the careful organization of her desk, the way her books were arranged by subject and not alphabetically, the tiny plants on the balcony that thrived because she nurtured them, not because anyone told her to. Every detail reflected patience, intelligence, and care. Thomas sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I've been blind, he whispered. I treated you like you were less than you are. I thought I was enough to define our life together, but I see now that I didn't even see you. Leona leaned against the doorway, her arms crossed, her face calm. She had expected this. She didn't need him to grovel. She needed him to understand, to see her fully, and for once he did. You never understood my work, she said softly. Not because you couldn't, but because you refused to look, and that's okay. Until tonight. But now you do. He lifted his head, eyes red, raw, and honest. I do. I see everything. Every call you've taken, every deal you've negotiated, every sleepless night building something incredible. I see you. And I'm sorry for all the times I made you feel small. I was wrong. I'm so wrong. She stepped closer, letting the tension between them soften. Apologies aren't enough, she said, though there was no anger in her voice. You need to prove it with how you move forward, with respect, with partnership, with understanding, and most importantly, with support, not control. Thomas nodded, swallowing hard. I will. I promise. I want to be the husband you deserve not someone who belittles your brilliance, but someone who walks beside you, sees you, respects you. Leona allowed herself a small smile, one that carried relief, pride, and quiet triumph. Then start by letting me be myself, fully, not just in your shadow, not just behind the guise of being supportive. Let me lead, let me shine, and trust me to guide when I say I know what I'm doing. He reached for her hand, holding it gently. I will. I see now. I finally see. And I won't forget it again. The apartment felt warmer than it ever had. Not because of the lights or the luxury furniture, but because respect and understanding had finally entered the space between them. Thomas's pride had been humbled, replaced by awe and love, and Leona's quiet strength had been fully recognized, not by the world alone, but by the man she trusted most. In the following weeks, things shifted naturally. Thomas stopped undermining her work, stopped making offhand comments about her projects, and instead became her partner in the truest sense, supportive, respectful, and genuinely proud. At home, she continued her business quietly, negotiating, strategizing, and building her empire with Thomas by her side, now fully aware of her brilliance. Their relationship transformed. Arguments became conversations, silence became listening. Shared moments gained depth. Thomas no longer measured success by his own hustle alone. He began to see the value in her quiet, calculated, unstoppable growth. Leona continued to live her life simply by choice, not necessity. She dined with Thomas, laughed with him, and nurtured their home. But the world outside no longer defined her worth. She was recognized for her intelligence, her strategic mind, and the unseen empire she had been building long before anyone in the room, including her husband, had noticed. And Thomas? He learned humility. He learned that love wasn't about ownership, it was about partnership. He learned that brilliance doesn't need loud applause to exist, and sometimes, the quietest person in the room holds the greatest power. Together, they stepped forward, not as teacher and student, not as leader and follower, but as equals. And the world, when it saw Leona Thomas, finally understood what he had been blind to all along. The empire she built in silence had now touched everything. Her family, her husband, and the wider world that could no longer ignore her. Leona smiled quietly as she looked toward the horizon from their balcony one evening, Thomas beside her, hand in hers. She knew the future was hers to shape, and this time he would walk beside her, seeing her as she truly was. Power, grace, vision, humility, and love, finally mutual, fully awakened.